I want to talk about the real state of our nation. The president just finished his speech before Congress, and as usual, is full of inspired, high-flying rhetoric and rosy promises for the future. But it's important to separate the reality from the stage show, and we need a real discussion of where we are so we can set our priorities right and secure the future for our imperiled families, communities, our country, and our planet. So I will say what you likely already know, that the State of the Union is not strong. It's actually quite troubled, and in critical ways, it's getting worse. But it is eminently fixable. We're facing unprecedented crisis, an economy in relentless decline for the vast majority, and a climate accelerating towards catastrophe. In In addition, we face expanding endless wars and the attack on liberties, but solutions are ready at hand that can bring a just and sustainable prosperity that can rescue the climate and make wars for oil obsolete. And these solutions already enjoy majority public support. A movement for democracy and justice is rising up across the country and the world that is moving these solutions forward for people, peace, and the planet. And the Green Party is here to give that movement the political voice it deserves and must have in order to be effective. So before talking about those solutions, I first want to acknowledge what I didn't hear from the president, that the vast majority of Americans are struggling. Nearly 1 in 2 is now living below or near the poverty level, with children, students, elders, and people of color hardest hit. Nearly 49 million Americans have no health insurance. Over 6 million have had their homes taken through foreclosure. Average households lost an astounding 40% of their wealth in the recent downturn, and in low-income communities, this reached a staggering 90% of their wealth, thanks in large measure to this poverty and hopelessness and the failed war on drugs. Over 7 million people, largely poor African American and Latino men, are under correctional supervision, 10 times greater than the number in 1965. And 37 million college students and recent graduates are trapped in student loan debt. Keeps uh, bragging about, with half of graduates now in jobs that do not require a college education and do not pay commensurate with that education that 37 million students have gone in debt in order to achieve. Roughly 25 million Americans are unemployed or unable to find full-time work. Household income has fallen faster since the end of the recession than during the recession itself, because the recovery, as well as the vast majority of predicted future employment, is low-paying jobs. While record numbers are in poverty, the 1%, large corporations and the wealthy, have never had it better. The big corporations enjoy historic profits as they contribute less than any time since before the Second World War to the tax base that keeps the infrastructure going that their profits and our lives rely on. Big banks who are bigger than ever, thanks to the continuing bipartisan failure to rein them in. The second point I want to make before getting to the solutions is that the political establishment, Democrats and Republicans, is largely making the crisis, imposing austerity on everyday people while they continue to squander trillions on endless wars, Wall Street bailouts, and tax breaks for the wealthy. The president is very much a part of that establishment, having campaigned on a populist platform of taxing the rich, saving Social Security, and making the economy fair. The president has once again morphed into an invaluable ally of the economic elite, willing to throw you under the bus. In his recent fiscal cliff deal, he did not tax the rich. He largely gave them the store. And he's now once again looking to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. This is going to undo whatever benefit he might achieve by passing a minimum wage law. And let's hope that comes to pass. But I'm not holding my breath looking at the track record of the president's other promises in his previous addresses, including his State of the Union address last year. But needless to say, these proposed cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are absolutely unconscionable. And this continues the policies of the first Obama administration, which clearly did not make the economy fairer. And these policies are still driving the crisis. Trillions in Wall Street bailouts that are ongoing as we speak. 85 billion every month to continue bailing out the big banks. Corporate trade agreements that continue to send jobs overseas and depress wages at home. This is what the president was talking about in referring to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and how frightening that he's planning to do the same thing again now across the Atlantic. He brought us health care reform that locked out single payer and the public option, locked them out of the debate. He brought us drill baby drill energy policies, which he's still talking about. He brought us the sabotage of international climate accords, millions of avoidable home foreclosures, which are ongoing, and the dramatic escalation of immigrant deportation, as well as the expanding wars for oil and drone wars and assaults on our basic civil liberties and more. All of these policies were substantially promoted or controlled by the White House and cannot simply be blamed on those Republicans. Now, political establishment, including the Obama White House, is making the crisis worse with its continuing obsession, which you heard over and over again in that speech, about the concocted budget deficit crisis. This is, in fact, a thinly veiled excuse for austerity. That is, for cutting social programs and for ignoring the unemployment, which is the real source of the deficit and the real source of the crisis. Let's be clear, this deficit resulted largely from the economic downturn brought on by Wall Street waste, fraud, and abuse. That downturn not only killed jobs, it also depressed tax revenues, causing the federal deficit to skyrocket. And it was further worsened by the endless immoral wars, the giveaways to the rich, and the private health insurance waste. Those austerity cuts now being advocated by the president and Congress are virtually guaranteed to make the deficit worse. Because when you cut programs, you cut jobs and the tax revenues created by the jobs. The more austerity, the more unemployment you create, and the worse the deficit gets. That's why austerity has proven over and over to worsen unemployment. In the 1930s, austerity turned a Great Recession into the Great Depression. And it's worsening the economic crisis in Europe right now. That's why the president's proposals and the Republican proposals to lower the deficit by cutting social programs, especially Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, are dangerous and misguided. Social Security is not in crisis and does not need to be cut in order to be saved. The best thing for the long-term stability of Social Security is to simply lift the payroll tax cap and include capital gains and dividend income in the Social Security payroll tax pool. We can lower the deficit in the long run by creating jobs that generate revenue, and in the short run by taxing the rich, cutting the bloated military, and ending private health insurance waste through Medicare for All insurance system. As you know, we're facing not only an economic crisis, but the climate crisis too. In the past year, we've seen record heat, fires, storms, floods, sea level rise, drought, and rising food prices. As the president mentioned, some of that, but he clearly didn't understand what's driving it, because all of the above energy strategy does not fix it. And in fact, it's worse than just those things I mentioned. In fact, Antarctica and Greenland are melting 5 times faster than just 2 decades ago. leading to an estimated 6 feet sea level rise, and possibly much more by the end of the century, which is going to make the storms and the floods far worse and devastating, in fact. Already, 400,000 lives a year, including 1,000 children a day, are being lost due to climate change. The global economic cost is well over $1 trillion a year and 1.6% of global GDP, in fact. And this has huge costs, economic as well as human, in the United States as well. And all of this has happened with 1 degree temperature. That's 1 degree Celsius. Yet we are, and in fact, it's less than 1 degree Celsius. Yet we are already on track for 6 times as much temperature rise by 2100. That is a rise of 6 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine, if all of this is happening with less than 1 degree Celsius temperature rise, imagine what 6 degrees will be. As an example of what that means, consider this. When you have a heat wave now in Boston, New York, or other northern or Midwestern cities, we might see 95 or 100-degree weather for days at a time. But with the warming that's now in the pipeline, a heat wave won't just bring 100-degree temperatures, it will bring 125-degree temperatures. That is the future of heat waves that we are looking at just a few decades down the line. As we know, and you know, people will go down like flies in sustained 125-degree temperatures. The air conditioning, you can be sure, is going to fail, and the electricity will black out. And what you may not have thought about is that livestock will also be wiped out. All it takes is a day of that heat to eliminate your livestock. That is, all sorts of animal husbandry will be basically over, causing additional stress to the U.S. and the world supply, which would be drastically reduced to start in a warm. What's now that our planet is still tipping, at which certain key consequences of climate change trigger unstoppable acceleration of warming. And when that happens, it will render our climate incompatible with civilization as we know it, and potentially incompatible with human life as we know it. The worrisome thing is that these tipping points, like the disappearance of polar ice caps and the melting of methane deposits in cold areas of the planet, that's already happening. That's why we simply cannot allow the climate to continue warming. To allow climate change to proceed is to engineer the demise, not just of our distant descendants, but quite possibly of our grandchildren and our children, and perhaps ourselves as well. That's why we must solve both the climate and the economic crises at the same time, and we must start now. They are ultimately one and the same. We can't solve one without solving the other. So now for the good news. We can fix both of these crises through a Green New Deal, an emergency program to create 25 million jobs to jumpstart the green economy, put a halt on climate change, and make wars for oil obsolete. The Green New Deal empowers communities to decide what jobs they need to become sustainable. It prioritizes jobs in clean renewable energy and conservation, in sustainable agriculture, in public transportation, as well as jobs that teachers, nurses, childcare, after school and home care, drug abuse and violence prevention and rehabilitation. It would create public sector jobs and establish a modern conservation corps and public works administration. It would jumpstart community-based small businesses as well as worker-owned cooperatives. It would cost far less than the 2009 stimulus package, less in fact than $500 billion. But that would create far more jobs. In fact, enough to jumpstart a real sustainable recovery, because we create jobs, then provide tax breaks, which is an expensive and ineffective tool for creating jobs. It was tax breaks that was used in the 2009 stimulus package for the most part. So the Green New Deal, it could be funded, in fact, by cutting the bloated military to year 2000 levels, by saving hundreds of billions of dollars per year, and through doing that, and by taxing the rich. This includes a small 0.5% sales tax on Wall Street. They are paying 10% general uh, for sales tax. So half is actually a very small thing to ask of the world's richest people. It would generate about $350 billion annually while reining in Wall Street speculation. So this is a win-win on all sides. In addition, we would increase capital gains and tax it as income, and income would be taxed more progressively, with multimillionaires and billionaires paying in the 50 to 80% range, like they did before the tax giveaways of recent decades. The Green New Deal would also be funded through savings that we get by eliminating health insurance waste through Medicare for All. This would provide health care to everyone while ending the massive, wasteful private health insurance bureaucracy and reducing the medical inflation that's overwhelming federal, state, and household budgets. And this would save trillions of dollars over the next decade. By jumpstarting the green economy, the Green New Deal can begin to rein in climate change. But we need to take several additional steps. One, we must enact a carbon fee to make fossil fuel companies pay for the costs of their carbon emissions and speed the transition to clean, renewable energy and efficiency and conservation. Two, we must rapidly shut down dirty energy by phasing out coal, nuclear, oil, and natural gas. And three, we must say no to all new forms of dirty, climate-changing energy. No to Keystone XL pipeline, no to tar sands oil, no to fracked gas and fracked oil, no to new mountaintop removal, coal, deep water drilling, and Arctic drilling. And number four, we need democratic control over our energy to ensure that we will leave the lethal fossil fuels in the ground and achieve a zero carbon, full employment economy that's essential to save our planet and our children and our economy. I'll just mention, in addition, we need to end the student debt. Instead of bailing out the banks, let's simply redirect that $85 billion being spent by the Fed now every month to continue the Wall Street bailouts. Instead, we simply redirect that $85 billion a month from the bank bailouts to bailing out the students. And they will then be debt-free within the next year, actually within the next year and a half. But that's good time. In addition, we need to make public higher education free. We have done this over the past century for secondary school education, which was necessary for economic security. In the future, we need college education to guarantee economic security. So by extension, we should be paying. That is essential. In addition, we know that it pays for itself. We know this from the GI Bill, which basically returned $7 in public benefits for every dollar that was invested. The actual cost of this is approximately $30 billion a year to get it jump started. This is a tiny fraction of what we are paying right now to bail out Wall Street. We also call for respecting immigrant rights as human rights, and this means providing a respectful and welcoming path to citizenship right now, not 15 years from now, as in the Obama plan. It also calls for ending the vicious and cruel deportations now, not continuing them as Obama is continuing to do. And we call for renegotiating the free trade agreements that caused these problems in the first place and creating fair trade agreements that end the flow of economic refugees into this country. And in addition, we call for ending the war on drugs, which is needed in and of its own right. It's also needed to provide the real border security that no border fence and no border wall can ever provide. Finally, we need to end the wars for oil and other resources that have created a permanent, immoral, and unaffordable war. That includes not simply withdrawing troops, and what the president announced tonight is a little bit late. He had previously said that the war would be turned over, in fact, to the Afghanis. If I am recalling correctly, he said the war would be turned over by 2014. Now he's talking about withdrawing about half of the troops by the end of 2014. So when exactly does this war end? We don't know. We need to bring our troops home now, and in addition, we need to put an end to these cruel, inhumane, outrageous drone wars, which are a threat to human rights everywhere and to civil rights and civil liberties everywhere as well. We need to end these drone wars and, in fact, lead an international convention to create a worldwide treaty, in fact, to put an end to these wars. And likewise on nuclear power, it is well and good to take the nuclear weapons on alert that are deployed, these deployed nuclear weapons, to reduce their numbers. That must be done. But we actually need to reduce the numbers of nuclear weapons as well. And while the president on one hand talks about reducing weapons deployment, on the other he has committed $600 billion to actually create a whole new generation of nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons delivery, including new missiles, new nuclear bombers, and new nuclear-powered submarines. So we need not just lip service to the concept of nuclear armament. We need real progress towards reducing the nuclear threat of these weapons, not simply between the United States and Russia, not simply looking at the potential of Iran to create nuclear weapons, but looking at nuclear weapons where they exist around the world. And that includes Israel, that includes Pakistan, that includes India. We need to begin a real progress towards nuclear disarmament to end this terrible scourge on our future. So to conclude, I'll just say that these solutions are available. They are within arm's reach. A Green New Deal can end the crisis in our economy as well as the crisis to our climate. And at the same time, we can create health care as a human right. We can end the immoral and endless wars, and we can create a respectful and welcoming path to citizenship and end the deportation. The public supports these solutions by substantial majorities. The missing link here is for us to stand up and to use that public support that exists to move forward and to reclaim the promise of our democracy and to implement the life-saving, planet-saving solutions we urgently need. The political establishment that got us into this crisis and keeps pushing us in deeper will not get us out. We are the ones we have been waiting for. We, the people, must reclaim our future. The vibrant social movements rising up around us are beginning to do that. And as the Green Party, we can give those movements the political voice they deserve. Together, we can begin to turn this breaking point we face into the tipping point we need to take our future back and make it healthy, just, peaceful, and green.
Thank you, Jill. It's interesting to compare what you've just said to Obama and whereas Obama had mostly vacuous sugarcoating. You had substantial policy. Now, people can argue one way or another about whether they agree or not with different policy aspects, but uh, it's far different to hear someone uh, present a plan rather than empty rhetorical euphemisms that sound as if they were reworked from a fairly unsuccessful advertising agency. That's how I would characterize Obama's presentation compared to what you just talked about. Uh, Interesting in terms of watching the chat. There's a fair amount of agreement in what you're saying, of course. Uh, I have some. I have a few broad questions, having heard Obama and having heard you, and thoughts about the general state of the union. Uh, One thing that always comes to mind uh, is that I can't help but wonder if there is a belief that Americans have lost their ability to critically analyze, because anybody with some sense of analytical abilities would see right through Obama's speeches as empty. Uh, I'm wondering how you feel about the state of the general public and whether Obama, why people find Obama credible, or maybe you feel they don't find him credible and they just accept him because they're not aware of a deeper analysis that you just presented. Go ahead.
I think, Craig, that's a really great point. And to me, it brings to mind um, how hard the politics to suppress alternative voices. When Sherry Honkala and myself went to the gates of Hofstra University, and tried to raise the issue that people don't have to settle for these two corporate sponsored candidates that basically, agree with each other on most issues, from the expanding war to the undermining of wages and the exporting of our jobs and the corporate free trade agreements and privatizing healthcare and education and all the rest. People don't like being forced to choose between two horrible options that make their lives worse when people are already struggling to keep their homes, to keep their jobs, to get a job, to get a decent wage, to pay down their debt. The reason they work so hard, the reason the Democrats and Republicans and their leaders work so hard to silence our voices, our alternative voices, is because the public so intensively resonates with what we have to say. So they rely on two things. One is silencing our voices, and the other is scaring people into thinking that, scaring especially the people who would agree with us, scaring them into thinking they have to vote their fears and not their values. This whole politics of fear thing. But, I think the answer to that is getting clearer all the time, because people are in such desperate straits these days. They really are beginning to see that what the Democrats have to offer may be a slightly less horrific than what the Republicans are offering. The cuts to Medicare aren't quite as steep. The cuts to health care aren't quite as bad. The austerity isn't quite as bad. It's terrible on top of a already desperate situation, but it's not quite as bad. People are realizing that the difference between Republicans and Democrats is no longer enough to save their jobs or to save their homes or to get them out of debt, or certainly not enough to save the climate, as we heard from Obama's basically drill baby drill continued policies. So as people wake up to that fact that it's a choice between a rapidly sinking ship or a slightly less rapidly sinking ship, that's no choice at all. I think increasingly people realize they have nothing to lose and everything to gain by standing up with the politics of courage and actually driving forward the real solutions that will get us out of this mess.
Uh, I'm not sure if you have Netflix or watched the series House of Cards. Uh, Rarely am I impressed with things that are nominally mainstream media, but of course Netflix is doing something very unusual and taking something straight to them, and this they actually outbid some of the mainstream media to get this show. Although I can't imagine much of the mainstream media would be interested in it. Uh, House of Cards is a series about the uh, the Democratic majority whip and his wife, who heads a not for profit called Clean Water Initiative, and my hope is that enough people will see it that will get a sense of what the Democratic Party is really like. It is so it so exposes how corrupt they are. Uh, and makes it so obvious. Kevin Spacey will actually turn to the camera periodically and explain why he's doing what he's doing. But I'm wondering if even some aspects of the media, because obviously David Fincher and Kevin Spacey who took the role. There were some writers and directors and producers who felt they needed to expose something, and apparently were able to convince somebody to invest millions of dollars to buy that. So I believe we lost Jill for the moment. Jill, are you still there?
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
you're fine. Okay, that's no problem. In fact, without the video, the audio may be better. But I'm wondering, how can we reach people given we don't have access to the mainstream media? What do we do? What are you doing besides now having run for president to get word out? Do you have a strategy for us or for activists in general to know? So much of what I hear is let's write a letter to Obama or petition or dissuade him from doing this or that when he has no interest in listening to us. And that's why I mentioned House of Cards, because it's very evident who pays their tune. Go ahead. What is your plan? What do you think we should be doing?
Well, I would encourage people who are not yet plugged into my campaign website to do that, because we are still running strong, and the election. Or let me put it another way: just because they held a rigged election doesn't mean that the fight is over. The fight is ongoing, and at this point, and our the people who were engaged in the campaign are very much still fighting the fight, and in many ways. So, for example, we are mobilizing for the upcoming February 17th mobilization in DC. There will be a strong Green Party contingent. We will be there with our message. Our message is not simply stop the pipeline, but stop the fracking, stop the mountaintop removal, stop the exploration of the Arctic, stop the nuclear power, stop all of that. And in fact, the alternative to it is the full employment, clean energy economy of the future. We're talking about fixing the economic crisis as we fix the climate crisis. We need holistic, comprehensive solutions. We can't do this with single bullets. We got a big problem ahead of us, and we need the big vision solutions. We will be there talking about it, that we need political change not climate change. We will be carrying those signs because we know that you will not get the policy changes that we need unless we are also getting the political changes that we must have. The two go hand in hand. So we will be there on the 17th, and we will be there with the climate movement. We will be there with the anti-fracking movement. We will be there with Occupy, with workers fighting for decent wages and for decent benefits. We will be there with the teachers who are fighting to stop the privatization of schools and the closings of schools and the testing, the commodification of education into these oppressive testing regimens. So these movements are going on, and we will be there with them actually in the trenches. And we encourage you to network through our website for starters, and also network with your state Green Party. If your state doesn't have a Green Party, get in touch with our campaign, and we'd like to help you form one. But by staying in touch with the National Party, with our campaign, and with your state parties, that's how we continue to build this force and create our own networks that do an end run around the corporate control of the media. And one to add, which is just that we're doing candidate trainings right now all around the country. You will see them on our campaign calendar at jillstein.org. And if you can possibly go to one if it's near you. If it's not, let us know, and we'll do our best to create a campaign school in your area.